Here's a thought. Every single terrorist group in history, they all have an expiration date. They all end, one way or another. But how they actually end? Well, it's probably not what you're thinking. Let's get into it.
So let me ask you, how does terrorism actually end? I mean, really think about it. For most of us, after years and years of hearing about it, the answer seems, well, it seems pretty obvious, right?
Your mind probably jumps straight to special forces, right? Drone strikes, the whole war on terror idea. We've all got this picture in our heads of a conflict that's won on some distant battlefield. It's the story we see everywhere, in movies, on the news. It's just the narrative.
But what if that whole narrative is just wrong? What if the actual data tells a story that's completely different? Yeah. So let's just push all those assumptions aside for a minute and look at what the numbers actually say.
And look, this isn't just some theory I'm pulling out of thin air. We're going to be looking at a landmark study from the RAND Corporation. These guys analyzed a whopping 648 terrorist groups between 1968 and 2006. They literally tracked every single one to see how it ended. It's pretty much the most comprehensive look at this topic we've ever had.
And when they crunched all that data, wow, the results were, well, they were not what anyone expected. This right here, this chart, it just completely flips the script. Just look at this. The number one way these groups end, 43% of the time, is by becoming political. They join the system. And right behind that, at 40%, is just good old-fashioned police work. Victory? Super rare, only 10%. And military force, the thing we all think of first, it's dead last.
Just 7%. That's it. Let that sink in. For the vast, vast majority of these groups, the military wasn't the final answer. So that's the big question, right? If it's not soldiers and bombs, then what is working?
Well, according to the data, the single most effective strategy is taking groups from bullets to ballots. I know, it sounds kind of crazy, but let's break down how that actually happens.
So here's the secret sauce. It really comes down to what the group wants, the breadth of their goals. If a group has really narrow specific demands, there's a much higher chance for a negotiated settlement. I mean, it makes sense, right? A government can talk about changing a policy or two. It's a lot harder to negotiate your own complete overthrow. A perfect example of this in action is the FMLN in El Salvador. See, they weren't trying to, take over the world. Their goals were super specific. They wanted a democratic transition, an end to government repression, and land reform. And because those were things you could actually sit down and negotiate, there was an opening. And that opening eventually led to the Chapultepec Peace Accords in 1992, which put an end to a brutal 12-year civil war.
All right, so that's the number one way. Now let's talk about the second biggest reason these groups end. What happens when talking just isn't on the table? Well, the next best thing is to completely change how you think about the problem. And that's where the policing model comes in. Think about it this way. Instead of treating terrorism like a war to be won, you treat it like a crime to be solved. The focus shifts from soldiers to detectives, from battlefields to crime scenes. It's all about intelligence, making arrests, and using the legal system to pull the organization apart from the inside.
And a really powerful and kind of chilling example of this is what happened in Japan with Shinrikyo. You might remember them, the doomsday cult behind that absolutely horrific sarin gas attack on the Tokyo subway back in 1995.
So after that attack, Japan didn't send in the army. Nope. They sent in the police, and it was just meticulous, patient police work. They kicked off a huge intelligence operation, arrested over 200 members, all the way up to the leader, Shoko Asahara. Then they hit him where it hurts, the wallet. They used the legal system to freeze all their assets and basically dissolve the organization. They treated them like an organized crime syndicate, not an army. And you know what? It worked.
Okay, so we've covered the big two, politics and policing. But what about that other slice of the pie? Let's talk about those rare cases where military force or outright victory actually are the answer. So military force can work, but the RAND study is super clear that it only works in very specific situations. It's best for taking on big, well-armed insurgencies that actually hold territory, like a traditional army. It's not so great against small, scattered cells that just blend in with everyone else. And a group actually winning? That's even rarer. It almost only happens when their goals are really, really narrow, like gaining independence for one specific area.
So when you step back and look at the whole picture, it's just undeniable. Politics and policing together, they account for a staggering 83% of how these groups end. That leaves military force and victory as tiny little outliers.
The data just couldn't be any clearer on this.
Okay, so what's the big takeaway here? Why should we care about these numbers? Well, it basically suggests that we might need to completely rethink our entire approach to counterterrorism.
The central point of the whole RAND report is this. We need to shift from a war on terror mindset to a counterterrorism strategy. It's a subtle but really important difference. It means less focus on open warfare and much more on patient intelligence gathering, solid police work, and, whenever it's possible, political negotiation.
And the authors of the report don't mince words. This quote right from their summary just lays it all out. They argue that the very phrase war on terror is part of the problem because it makes the public expect a clean battlefield solution, a solution that the data shows almost never happens.
Which kind of leaves us with one last big question to think about. This data isn't new. It's been out for years. So if all the evidence shows that patient policing and messy politics are what really works, why do you think that simpler, more dramatic story of war is still so powerful? Why does it stick with us?